Hey everybody, welcome to the Bonnie Bay Crochet channel, and this is Bonnie Barker, and today I wanted to answer a question that came up during the most recent Friday Fun Live episode, and you can come and watch those with me and participate in our live chat every Friday right here on this channel at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or whatever time we're in that particular time of the year. But anyway, so a lot of times you'll find that yarn will come like this and needs to be wound instead of already in these pre-wound things. And before we can even talk about these things, we need to go over some vocabulary. Whenever yarn comes like this, it's generally called a hank, H-A-N-K. But most of you probably started out like I did, with probably a smaller thing than this. This is a jumbo size, but this is often called, well, I learned to call it a skein. Some people call it a skein or skein, depending on what part of the country, what part of the world you live in. You might pronounce it a little bit differently, but I'm going to stick with my personal pronunciation I learned down in South Florida, a skein, spelled S-K-E-I-N. So, anyway, so these are the most common, and they also often have like these little center pull out so that you can just, whoop, that wasn't the center. It's right over here. Like you can pull the yarn out of the center and just go ahead and start crocheting. Or if you're unfortunate and you can't find that one and you have to unwind this, then you are pulling on the yarn consistently throughout your project. So this is the most common. And now most of these that come like this, not all, but most of these are 100% acrylic, and they come from companies that are very highly mechanized in their production. Companies like Red Heart Yarns, Aran, just to name a few. Probably, I imagine Paint Box Yarns also in the UK would also have a lot of mechanization. But I thought that was the main reason why yarn is like this instead of like this. But then the more I dug into this, the more I learned. Okay, so let's go over some more terms here, because yarn doesn't just come these two ways. Sometimes it comes in these kind of balls. Okay, this is one I picked up over in Australia. Here is another skein thing. It's smaller, and this actually has cotton and wool, so more natural fibers, but it yet wound in a skein. Very interesting. A lot of times you'll see balls like this, occasionally little ones like this, and you may have seen this at the craft store before. This is a cotton acrylic blend, and they also come in cakes. I did not wind this. This came from the store in this flat wound thing we call it a cake. And of course, sometimes when you have to wind things from a hank, you may end up winding it into a ball like this by hand, which I did before the years I had my yarn winder. And let me go ahead and show you what this looks like. Okay, this is a ball winder. And if you're interested in watching a video on how this plays out, how this works in real time, I do have a video on my channel. Just check the video description below. Okay, so this would actually hook on to the table. Your table would go here, and then you screw this on tightly. Of course, if you don't have a table with a lip, it's going to be really hard to use this. So, but this is an excellent ball winder, by the way. It's a Stanwood ball winder. It's an enlarged one. It's a lot bigger than the smaller ones you see on the market. It's a bit more pricey, but it's very highly durable, and I've had this for a number of years. Now, if you, the other thing that you could use, or that you need when you're winding with the ball winder, is a Swift. And I recently purchased this lovely case in order to preserve my Swift, because it is a bit more delicate. But I love it. It's beautiful. It's made of wood, and this also would hook to the other side of a table with this screw. Okay, so you need a table with a lip that you can attach to, and when you do that, you attach it, and then with this little key here, you can push up, and what this does is this will go out and in depending on the size of the hank that you are rolling, because they're not always wound to the same size. And I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a minute. So when you do that, then you tighten this right here. And as this is secured to a table, and once the yarn is secured here, this will spin as you pull the yarn off of it. So again, check out that video and you'll see just how nicely these operate. And when you do that, you end up with a beautiful little cake of yarn like this. And whenever I roll my yarn, I always make sure that I put the label inside the center so that I remember what the content of this is. Okay, so I did learn some things about, well, why do we even have this yarn in this condition instead of this condition or in this condition ready to go when we when we go to purchase the yarn. But let me explain some things. Let me go ahead. I'm going to open this up so that you see what it looks like. And this may remind you of these old Norman Rockwell pictures that you may have seen from years past. And it's just yarn wound, you know, in a big, long piece or hank, okay? And a lot of times you'll see people holding their hands, and if you don't have a Swift, you can just have someone sit there and hold your hand this apart like this, or you can place it on both of your knees and you can just wind it by hand. I've done that many times. Is a little more time consuming. The ball winders can wind up yarn in probably, I'm not kidding you, less than 2 minutes. So it's very efficient. Okay, well, one reason, let's go over some of the reasons. Why don't they sell this yarn already wound up for you? Well, for one thing, the natural fibers tend to be a little bit more delicate. I've read many times in many places doing some research on this that the yarn needs to breathe. I mean, it needs to, I mean, this is natural. This is hair. This is basically animal hair if it's a natural fiber. Or if it's, you know, a cotton-based, plant-based material. You know, it's something that was once alive. And you do need to be careful with it. This yarn, when wound into a tight ball, tends to put a bit more tension on the yarn than it would have just laying flat, or, you know, just laying kind of at ease and not being pulled. When you wind the yarn, no matter how you wind the yarn, even when using the ball winder, it does put a slight bit of tension on it. So I actually learned something new. I learned that if you are not going to be using the yarn for a while, it's best to just leave it in, you know, the hank format like this. Of course, you're going to want to, let me show you how you can twist this. You can twist this back up just like this. Okay. You can just twist it back up and leave it in your yarn box or basket or whatever you store your yarn in until you're ready to use it. And then you can wind it just as you're getting ready to work on your project. And that way the yarn is not tense, is not pulled tightly, because when you pull yarn tightly in a ball, it can thin the yarn. Now, when I wound this ball by hand, I'm going to show you, this is very squishy, very loosely wound, because I remember years ago winding just regular acrylic yarn. This is before the days where they came in pull scans. They were just scans that were a mess. If you tried to work from them, you had to roll them up by hand. And I remember rolling my yarn very tightly. And by the time I got to the middle of this ball, the yarn would actually be thinner than the yarn that I had already crocheted into my project. I do remember that, and that was many years ago. So yes, winding it ahead of time does put tension on the yarn and it will thin it. Another reason is a little more simple, in that oftentimes yarn that is already pre-wound in a particular way can really become a mess. This is not too much of a tangled issue, but I have stocked yarn at a local yarn store where everything came in scans and pre-wound balls in such a way that there would be some yarn that would just be an absolute tangled mess, and it was just unsellable after a while. And so, you know, it kind of protects the yarn a little bit to leave it in the hanks. Another reason has to do with the way the yarn is dyed. And when the yarn, if it was in a very tightly wound ball before dyeing, it would obviously be a lot harder to get consistency with the color and so forth. And another thing, when you're buying specialty yarns like this, if you can actually unwind, let me show you, unwind the hank and get a better feel for how long the colorways go in this specialty yarn. So I can also get a look inside and outside of the hank and kind of know, is this a yarn that I'm going to want to use? Is this a yarn with the colorways? Are they long enough? Are they short enough for what I want to do with my design or my particular pattern that I'm working on? Okay, now if the yarn is wound in a tighter ball, well, I see that there are other colors in this, but there's really no way for me to know how long, how long does the brown last? How long does the blue and the various colors last? But when it's in a hank, I can clearly get a much better feel. I can see that these are much longer colorways than what I would normally, see in a ball or even in a tightly wound hank. So lots and lots of reasons. If you have any other questions about this, please let me know by commenting below. I would love to know any other questions regarding yarn. I'm hoping to do more videos like this and one coming up in the near future on yarn storage issues. So you want to tune in for that one. God bless you all. Bye-bye.